Alrighty, so we are the group that studied mask effectiveness throughout the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States. We had 4 group members: Anastasia, myself, Rachel, Josh, and Tyson. All right, so I'm going to move my box here. Okay, so just to kind of introduce our whole research project here, we studied the COVID-19 pandemic like I think a lot of the other groups did, and our aspect was mask mandates and mask effectiveness. We found the data that came out at the beginning of the pandemic, the first few months, has really changed over time. We started out with 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and here we are over a year later. So there was a lot of information to be looked at here. We wanted to know if wearing a mask throughout the pandemic reduced the number of deaths and transmission rates. We had goals of, trying to find reliable resources when looking at this data, because a lot of the other aspects in the pandemic are pretty politically charged. So we wanted to ensure we were getting reliable data. We wanted to know if the research showed that wearing a mask makes an individual feel safer as well. And we did that through survey methods, but we'll get to that a little later. We wanted to show how people's different behaviors contributed to whether or not they would wear a mask. And then finally, we wanted to know if people were more willing to wear a mask today as opposed to the beginning of the pandemic. All right, so our main question here was, were mask mandates actually effective at slowing the spread of COVID-19 throughout 2020? Our objective was to find conclusive data and research to determine the effectiveness of mask mandates on slowing the spread of COVID-19. All right, so kind of the exciting part here, the big piece of our research project was our hypothesis. We said that we think that mask mandates were effective at slowing the spread of COVID-19 throughout the 2020 pandemic. All right, and so as far as our methods go, our main primary method of research was done through peer-reviewed articles in reputable medical and scientific journals. We also did surveys, and we conducted surveys. Each of our team members conducted surveys on public opinion of mask wearing. And then the articles and papers reviewed by the research team, we used a variety of methods, including opinion surveys, data analysis, simulation studies, and controlled lab testing. All right, so just to address some elements of past research, because COVID-19 is a novel virus and this is kind of a new pandemic, there was not a whole lot of research or study on this pandemic besides some prior studies about the coronavirus itself, but not COVID-19. Most of the research out there is related to the rates and transmission rates of COVID-19, number of deaths, and we wanted to look at mask effectiveness because it didn't seem like there was much out there. That didn't really seem to be a big focus of everyone right now. Many of the studies have been retracted due to inefficiencies in findings, as well as researchers using improper ways to collect and analyze data. It's been kind of a tough thing to get a good hold of recently. The more scientists learn about COVID-19, the more new studies shift, the more objectives of studies shift in order to discover new findings that can actually help stop COVID-19 from spreading. All right, and as far as our discussions, just kind of discussing some of our findings and kind of what we saw when we were researching. We saw that there was some variability in what could be interpreted as effectiveness in different places throughout the US. Of course, not everywhere saw the same devastations of COVID-19 transmission. So, and not everywhere had the same elements of legislation surrounding mask mandates. But ultimately, we found that it could be concluded that most mask mandates saw subsequent reductions in COVID-19 transmission and mortality rates. We can trust that our gathered data is reliable because COVID-19 mandates are a matter of public record. Positive COVID tests are recorded by local government and contribute to statewide data. And our surveys were reliable because questions were effective at giving us appropriate feedback, and we were able to determine our sample opinion of mask wearing, and we feel like it could be applied to the general population. And, there were certain elements that we talked about that may have contributed to numbers going down besides masks, but overall, we think that masks are probably the most important element that contributed to reductions in COVID transmission rates. All right. As far as our actual results go, our research and analysis concluded that mask wearing was and continues to be an effective method of reducing the spread of COVID-19, among other diseases. Research on mask mandates were conflicting and sometimes inconclusive. Ultimately, more research and long-term studies would be required to conclusively prove their effectiveness or ineffectiveness, just because there are a lot of variables when looking at a research question. From the data that we analyzed, the majority concluded that the mask mandate did decrease the number of COVID cases as well as deaths. All right, and then just kind of discussing the significance, like why this is important. This research is significant and relevant to the period that we're in right now, because we're still in the pandemic. There are variants that are popping up. We are dealing with controversy over the vaccine and vaccine effectiveness. And so there are any number of reasons why masks are going to remain in our lives, and knowing whether or not they're effective and whether or not they are important to our safety matters a lot right now. And it also matters when we look at, the legislation of these things and public trust in the government's response to whatever happens next. So our conclusion, mask mandate implementation has helped to slow the spread of COVID-19, has helped to decrease the number of cases as well as deaths, and wearing masks has made many people feel a lot more comfortable in public, knowing that the transmission rate has decreased. All right, and so to make it a little fun and to gauge your attention and focus on our presentation, we have an activity. And we placed random pictures of Barack Obama throughout our presentation to catch your attention. And we want to know how many Obamas that you counted. And yeah, that is